Okay, we're live. Just got with me, just waiting for Keith.
Hey Keith, you there?
No, we just hanging got to see if he's got the link. I'm not connected to the net, that's why. Get it. The network is paired up. In the backside, you see it fine. I can't see him. No, new link. Is that it? New link. Hey, yeah. Mark muted. Settings. Yeah. Can see. Alright. See if it's there. Hi everyone, this is Mr. Big G, Garth Holmes. Not live, we're just waiting for Keith if he's not gonna get to see. We're live. Comments. We're just waiting for him. Invite. Okay. Let's see what happens. Group layout, please. So, yeah. Oh, there's Keith. Ah, finally. Okay, at stage. Hey.
Quite a business.
Quite a business.
Quite a business.
Hi, Stefan.
Hey. Hey, Keith, sorry about that, man. Hey, lovely to have you here. Thanks for taking the time out. So, yeah, we're at Garth's house this evening. As I said, I just really wanted to talk a little bit of film and stuff. I'm going to turn it more towards Garth. A little bit of film and stuff. And yeah, we're just sharing this little kind of semi-live microphone, yeah. And yeah, I just wanted to chat about films and film school and documentaries and what you've been doing and what Garth's been up to, and also most importantly, I think about film education.
Yeah, I was trying to think about how we kick it off, and I thought I'd ask you if you'd seen Poor Things.
If I have seen it, no, I haven't.
You haven't seen it? Ah, well, that's not a good way to kick it off. Anyway, yeah, you've obviously heard about it.
Yes, I've read some article about it or a review. I know a little bit about it, but I just haven't had a chance to see it.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting films, very controversial. 50% of the audience are disgusted or hate it or were bored or thought it was chauvinistic or patriarchal or disgusting, kind of like a representation of women. And other people are just like in love with this film. Yeah, it's one of those films that you should go and see and then have supper with a whole lot of people afterwards, because you can have a long kind of debate.
I don't know much about the film myself.
Yeah, I saw it blind as well. I was told you're going to go and see thing, and we saw it at the Labia, possibly the most uncomfortable film seats in the world. Yeah, I'll tell you, backbreaking stuff. And some people, it was quite an arty crowd and a kind of lefty, old Joburg lefty crowd that were there, Cape Town lefty crowd, and that I was surprised to see how controversial it was.
No, it's interesting. Yeah, Keith, you've been to the Labia Theatre here in Cape Town, eh? There's something happening to the lag. It's a lag. Let's just see. It's his internet, maybe it can't be this. Not that slow. So I'm off.
There, we there. The Keith's off. Back there.
Let's see, he's not there.
Probably dropped off.
Add to state. Yeah, back. It says your device was not connected.
That happens sometimes, as we know. To answer your question, yes, I've been to the lobby of theater. I've actually been to both of the institutions.
Yeah, do you know what I think would be kind of a bit interesting? Live viewer comments show up here, so we don't have much live yet until if people find it. But I would love, Keith, I'd love for you, just because I just wanted to get, I love getting people together, is for you to talk to Garth about a little bit about your experience of South African film and what you've done here. And obviously, I mean, you and Gary being there after, unfortunately, Garth was not there, and he's, after's kind of, there's been changes, but, for me, that was an absolute highlight. And just to roll a little bit about that, and then I think some interesting stuff will come up. So I just wanted to kind of connect and talk about, and especially about films and film school. Because you also work at a film school, and Garth started a film school here, and I've worked at a film school, and I think that's what I wanted to talk a little bit about tonight, but more in the context of what we've all done. And Garth's also a big music collector, an old family friend. So yeah, let's roll it in that way, I think.
Sure.
I'm good. I'm good.
To know.
Keith, tell me, where did you study film, by the way?
Well, I originally started to study.
It happens. Just going to have to do it. It's not perfect, but just wondering. There. Okay, he's going to come back. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, these guys are, yeah, I mean, it's just like his entire experience of all of those years back and forth, working with Dion Moss and the SABC stuff and Shanghai Electro thing, and all of that is just like, it's just such incredibly seminal film work, in terms of music, and the fact that they also work in education, which for me, because Gary, I think, is also based between Prague and I think he's a visiting professor at the DC.
Is Gary at Prague and
no, Keith's in Prague.
Keith's in Prague.
Yeah,
so we're speaking to him in Prague now.
Yeah, he's in Prague. Let's just see if he comes back. Just hoping. It's going to be on it because
I think it's trying to come.
Yeah. At the stage. I just jumped out again.
Yeah, Keith. Yes, sorry.
Sorry?
I was just about to answer the previous question, but go ahead.
No, carry on.
Go for it.
Yes, so the question was, where did I start attending film school? Already as an undergraduate at American University in Washington, D.C., I started taking film production classes. And that came out of my relationship with one of my literature professors. I was actually studying literature and art history at that time, but it was all connected with film, and film was always one of my main interests at that time. But I had this remarkable lecturer and professor at university, Arnold Lustig, who I didn't know at the time. I didn't know it when I met him, but was probably the foremost Czech novelist writing about the Holocaust or the Shoah, based largely on his own experiences as a former inmate of 3 concentration camps during the Second World War. But he was also a very acclaimed screenwriter. In addition to the 15 or so novels that he wrote over the course of his career, several of them were adapted into films, and he also wrote a number of very screenplays for very well-known films of the Czech New Wave by the 1960s. So this guy had an extraordinary influence onto my life, and I started doing more and more active work with film production and video production and mechanics of filmmaking, coming out of my relationship already studying screenwriting with him. That was the origin. Then my deeper immersion in what I would call real film school was when I studied and then later worked at FAMU here in Prague in the Czech Republic. And FAMU, as you may know, is the 3rd oldest film school in the world. and
I've been to Farmer. I know it well, and I
yes,
used to know the director very well. His name is out of my head now.
okay. Well, when was it? I can tell you which dean it was if you tell me the year.
I'm talking about 4 or 5 years ago. The short. God, what is his name? Anyway, and I knew the dean before that went to. I think he went to USC or.
That's Pavel Yek. Pavel Yek.
Yeah, Pavel. That's him. That's the guy I know very well, Pavel. Yeah. Keith, can you hear me, by the way? I can't hear you. Steve, we've got lost again. There keeps coming back.
Yeah, to stage. Okay, right, and Paddy's, just a second, it's working.
I knew Pavel very well at Silek. And he was quite an influential character there as well. And a lovely human being as well, old Pavel.
Pavel and I were students together in the 1990s. So I've known him for almost 30 years. And we spent a lot of time together when we were younger, when we were students. At the time when Pavel was the dean, I was actually mainly working in South Africa by then. And before that, I had been running a film. So I had sort of parted ways with being actively in FAMU every single day by the time that he was running the show. But I was always on very good terms with him, of course, and was very aware of what he was doing.
Yeah, no, Pavel has been out to South Africa when we hosted Select, and he really enjoyed South Africa. And I've met him many times in all the kind of conferences that we had, from about 2003. I met him in Helsinki, actually, and at the Helsinki Film School. And then the last time I saw him was in India. We were at the Whistling Woods School in India, Mumbai. Yeah, the school that's linked to Film City there, Indian Film City. Mm. And Prague. Whoa, that place is bloody cold. Hey. That is a cold.
No,
it's a beautiful place, but gee, I must have been there in the coldest Prague winter in living memory. It was freezing.
It's not freezing now. It's been over 10 degrees for the last 2 weeks. I mean, it was briefly, it snowed around Christmas, but it's been above freezing ever since. It's not, it doesn't, but maybe I'm used to it. 10 degrees.
Yeah.
Cold.
Yeah, FAMU is a very, very well-known film school, and as you say, the third oldest. I've also been to I think the oldest is the one in Brussels. Hmm?
No, actually, the oldest is GIK in Moscow. But
you're right. Sorry, of course, that's where Eisenstein and the gang were there at that time. I've been there. Quite a remarkable school, that as well. And they built this massive new wing to it now. The old building in Moscow, and they put on a 12 million euro building there or something. It was ridiculously expensive. Maybe it was 110 million euro actually, and it was run by the ex-minister of culture.
I only remember the old building. I was at the GIK in 1991 for about 2 weeks, which was was a school exchange through FAMU, which was still in place, and it was virtually the only way at that time for me to get into the Soviet Union was through this, and so a number of students from mixed bag of Czech and foreign students. We went to GIK in the end of 1991, and we happened to be staying there when the Soviet Union dissolved itself on the 1st of December. So it was a really
exciting time when you were there.
Yeah, it was a, and I have to say, I've been back to Russia 4 times subsequently, and ironically enough, the atmosphere was probably more free and more open and more cultural in many ways when it was the first time in 1991. As it was, it didn't feel, even though it was the Soviet Union, it didn't feel like a dictatorship. And every time I've been back there subsequently, I've had some sort of negative experience with the police or with the authorities now. So it's I have actually somehow fond memories of that, as weird as it was.
Yeah, I enjoyed the fairly elitist system that they had for training people. You know, the master system, where you don't go to lectures or anything. Back in that time, you just have someone that is your mentor and master, and you meet him wherever or her wherever, and you kind of discuss films, and you go away and work a bit on your cinematography, and come back and show him. And, you know, he's just this guy that is, you know, like a mentor and tutor. I'm not sure how they training in nowadays, but I know that was one of the ways that they were training their senior students.
That approach actually is a very old form of European arts education that comes out of the former guild system, which was established essentially in, I guess, like the early modern era, what we would call from the Renaissance to the Enlightenment. The role of guilds was transformed from being purely artisanal, as it had been in the Middle Ages, and also became a space for creative mentorship. And in the 18th century, all European art schools, art academies that existed at that time functioned more or less on that model. The new model, we can call the new model, which FAMU runs on, is a sort of Bauhaus or Wiener Werkstätte inspired model that comes out of early modernism. And the way that Walter Gropius established the Bauhaus was based on this idea to have a symbiosis between practical training, creative training, which is that guild or mentor type system, and also theory, that the three should be interlinked and be in equal proportion to each other. That you learn theory, but you also learn a trade and a practical skill, but you also have room to do your creative work. And that sort of semi-utopian approach comes out of early modernist thinking anyway, but it became crystallized in the form of the Bauhaus and all of its successor art schools. So FAMU sort of is more based on that than that older classical model that the GIC used to have. Or Centro Sperimentale in Rome, which is the second oldest film school, which had yet another model, which was as the
backing again, eh? No, I'm kind of backing with the connectivity, you know, it's just interesting.
He's in Prague, and
we jumped out a few times, but anyway, so yeah, I mean, you're also a film school person. I mean, we've got Paddy in the background here as well. May as well just keep the conversation going. Yeah, while we wait for Keith. I think John's going to comment again. You know, just a little bit. Paddy in the background, just going to eventually jump in. Tell us a little bit about what
who am I meeting?
Well, Keith's going to eventually hopefully jump back in, but just tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
Well, I teach at Arts University Bournemouth in film production, and yeah, I'm just interested to hear what other opinions are on film schools around the world. So it looks like an interesting conversation to be part of.
It's just a pity that we're not, that we think about it. Are we adding into stage? Okay, so. Yeah, well, we got Paddy with us. So Paddy, you and God can hold the microphone. You can
come sit on the seat.
Just hand it to you. Just It's a laugh.
Yeah. This is Patty. She's my sister-in-law, actually, and she's from the UK, visiting and sorting out some administrative matters in South Africa. But I'll allow her to introduce herself.
Yes,
go.
please
Hi,
do.
Keith. Yeah, I teach on a film production course at Arts University Bournemouth. So
Okay.
yeah, just an interesting opportunity to hear a bit about. I'm not sure what you're discussing, but just the differences also on how things have changed. Do you feel things have changed with teaching film in the last 10 years?
I actually haven't been that involved full time in teaching film in many years. I was, for my own studies, as many people who went through FAMU were. I started working in basically what became international with Pavel Yek and Mikhail Bregant and other mutual friends. And that for a number of years, but then at the same time that I started working in South Africa extensively, which was around 2003, 2004, I also became involved with running a film festival here in Prague, which was basically a festival of music documentaries based in the Lucerna cinema and concert hall, the famous Lucerna building in the center of Prague, which was legendarily has always belonged to the Havel family, by the grandfather of our former president here, Václav Havel. I was very happy to be working in that space for a number of years, and I started only doing film teaching a little bit on the side. And I worked for NYU for many years on when they had programs in Prague, and for the Art Institute of Chicago, but I did it less and less. And I got more and more involved with making my own films, both in Czech Republic and in South Africa, and I sort of left it behind. Weirdly, in the last few years, I started teaching much more actively again, but I teach in the sociology department at Charles University, which is the old established formal university in the Czech lands, which was founded in the 14th century. And I teach a film as sociology course, which is for a mixture of undergraduate and graduate students. And everybody always mistakes it when I say that it's not film and sociology, which is sort of a separate topic. I'm really doing analysis of feature films as a form of sociology with sociology students. So, and it's just something that came my way during the pandemic when I wasn't doing very much. And it allowed me a back door back into academic work. Now I really enjoy it because it gives me a lot of freedom to design the course in my own way and to incorporate all the things that I'm interested in, and it gives me a platform for that. But it isn't really typical film school, film production type lecturing, which weirdly also in recent years I've done more of that in South Africa than in Prague. And I did have several guest lectures at AFTA, Johannesburg, and in Cape Town.
Yeah, Garth just said that. Sorry, I had to mute the microphone. There was just some noise. Sorry, I had to mute the microphone. Garth just said he'd never met you until tonight, and it was just such a pity because the lectures that you and Gary gave that day were just like some of the most seminal performances of anything in terms of some lecturing at AFTA when I was there. And the other one, obviously, also just recognizing other people when I brought Michael Cross in, to talk about the Radio Rats.
Oh yeah, sure.
And just by the way, Garth's sort of a big old SA sort of punker, shifty fan, all of that. So there's, we can just roll it in any way. So, I just wanted this thing to happen in an organic way. And at least we've got a couple of people watching, and I can't control all the comments, but I just want to thank everybody for being here, and, just going to let it roll.
Patty saw Poor Things, by the way, and she's in the other camp. I'm in the camp who hated it, and she's in the camp that loved it. But Lloyd from Shifty was with us that night as well, and he was in the camp that hated it. Just so that you know.
I'm one of these people. I really prefer to watch contemporary films in the cinema, and I then I am basically someone who goes to see films as much as possible in my local cinema in my neighborhood, which means that I wait for these type of films to get into distribution and then go to secondary distribution. So I'm often 3 months behind the rest of the world on watching contemporary films, but I like it that way, and I like the fact that there's a cinema that's almost 100 years old that's right down the street from where I live that still functions and is still there, and so I try to support it as much as possible. So very often I miss out on these exciting conversations when things are brand new. I'm sure I'll see it eventually.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it in the cinema. You saw it in the cinema as well.
In the lobby,
I think. In England, I live in England, and you're in. Yeah, so at least it's it's definitely
the
better.
lobby is an very old cinema. I think about 90 years now. The Lavia family, a very famous Italian family from Cape Town. But yeah, we were talking about how cold Prague was, and my wife always reminds me how cold Prague was. But of course, it's such a beautiful city as well. And then the filmmakers are what I call hardcore. You know, everyone, it's taken very, very seriously, and it's very difficult to get into FAMU, I think. Is it still like that?
It's actually incredibly difficult to get FAMU, and I sort of sneaked in because, as I was mentioning earlier, my professor in the United States, who later became a sort of surrogate grandfather to me, he was sort of this Jewish grandfather that I never had, or Jewish grandparent that I never had, and I, through his auspices and also through knowing his son, I was able to really. They just sort of snuck me in somehow in the early '90s when it was possible to do almost anything in Prague. It was a very different time. And now, when things were much less fixed, and it was really sort of a post-revolutionary environment, especially in FAMU, the school was still riven with all these internal debates at that time that were still connected with the legacy of the Velvet Revolution. So I sort of sneaked in the back door somehow. And then I realized once I was in there how great it was, what a magnificent and worthwhile opportunity it was to be there. So I started taking it extremely seriously. And that is when I also became so fascinated with the history of the school and the philosophy of the school, because I was sort of learning that stuff on the fly as I was there. I had never been in an environment like that. I hadn't gone to a classical arts school. I had a humanities background. So all of that was new to me. And I had studied in Europe a little bit when I was in high school in Paris, but so that aspect wasn't new to me. But the total immersion in studying art and being in a place where culture was at such an advanced and high level and taken so seriously, as you say, was very formative for me. It was a huge experience for me to go through it at a young age. And I don't know if Prague is the same now. I think FAMU is also a little different now. It's much more organized. It's much more compartmentalized. I think in some ways it's also better, but in some ways it's lacking that vibrancy or that intensity that it had in that era, which was something.
We found the exact thing with AFTA. When we were a young organization and we were kind of revolutionary and we were changing the way teaching happened and the way people were taught filmmaking, you know, that was the most exciting time of the school. It was when the school became formalized, you know, like with the Bologna Agreement in Europe,
Yes.
formalizing the degrees across the EU and that.
Yes.
We went through that accreditation process as well and became an accredited degree and postgraduate and master's degree. And of course, that kind of revolutionary spirit gets very diluted by the degree. And quite often, filmmakers are not really interested in any academics. or they just want to make movies, and it's taken a long time to settle the school back into an environment where there's a good balance between theory, creativity, and production.
Yeah, if I may, I'm going to throw a little bit of not a spanner in the works, but it's kind of what I've been trying to get to, because well, obviously Keith, Garth, myself, I'm not sure about you, but obviously knowing your husband, are music fans, and I've worked amidst music and film and the combo of that, and there are a couple of those people in the vinyl community that are people, I mean, Nick is on a show with George Borden, and George has been working at a also I call it a school of creative economy, creative arts. Working. I mean, he's a sound engineer, but working between film and music. A couple of other people. Steve Westman's got a show. Various other people. And for me, it's that whole thing about, if we look at the music industry now, we look at YouTube and casting agencies, and we look at where the film industry is at and how we're distributing content and all of that is, does it still hold a relevance, or do we just take a different approach, in terms of where we're heading with how we are sort of distributing, or engaging next generation with entertainment, be it music and film, which is where for me the collision here is happening.
Well, I mean, your question is mainly about distribution, I guess. And distribution, the changes in film distribution are an ongoing process. In the time that I've been making documentary films, I've had to learn about 3 different distribution models on the job. I've managed to do it. I'm of a generation that is sort of poised between these technological changes anyway, where I still grew up with analog technology and having to do actual research and having to really get your feet on the ground, and a DIY ethos that comes out of punk rock subcultures and the hip hop subcultures that I was involved with when I was younger, where you really had to do everything yourself to even make anything work. So I still remember that, and I still internalize all the lessons from that working model. But my generation also, in the 1990s and the early 21st century, were easily able to adapt to digital technologies and online technologies as they emerged. So I've always had one foot in both camps, and I'm happy to keep learning. So that all these changes in distribution models haven't slowed me down per se. It's you have to be incredibly nimble and open-minded, and of a realization that things are going to change. I mean, I started making co-production documentaries between Czech Republic and South Africa that were almost entirely based on agreements between broadcasters. Now that would seem really backwards. That was only 10 or 15 years ago, but the nation of working primarily through broadcasters is gone. It's a difference. The entire distribution of documentary films has changed so much and gone into much more of a streaming and digital model that you have to take that into consideration even at the financing stage. So all of those things have changed. In terms of music, all the music that I follow and that I'm involved with is still basically DIY artists who control most of their processes and intellectual properties themselves, rather than working through the failed ruins of the former music industry. But that's a separate question.
Well, this is what I wanted to get to, because we've got a lot of the physical product. We've got Bandcamp, we've got the streaming services, and we can scale them down, and what musicians earning peanuts. I mean, right now in South Africa, we have a situation where the average musician is earning more from teaching than from playing a live gig, and also that DJs are earning more than musicians. And this is actually what's kind of quite disturbing for me right now. And I'd love a little commentary on that.
Yeah, I must say that you have to move with the times, like you say, Keith, and you kind of DIY and JIT, just in time, is very much part of learning now. And obviously, the kind of access that we have to knowledge is critical for that, and then the access we have to platforms. That for me has just changed everything. And we also have a far bigger generation in South Africa, for example, a far bigger generation of musicians that are more formally trained at school than we had before. It was a tiny little elite group of people that had music lessons and had the opportunity to learn an instrument or an opportunity to develop that skill.
I'd like you to just address Nick's question there, because Nick is,
thanks,
yeah. So there it is. He said, I think it's cool to educate people on things they might not know and may feel dumb asking. There's no dumb questions. I had to learn it sometime.
I'm not sure what Nick's asking.
Well, we've been talking about education. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, it's important because I think, it's for DCI as well. It's the dumbing out. It's the dumbing out, and that's what I'm saying is, I recall, as I said to you, and we were talking earlier about your brother Earl's mate Brad, making his open mic documentary, and back then his interview with Jack Holzman, and Holzman stating, on open mic that YouTube is the new open mic, and that's the distribution model. We've gone from sort of to TikTok, and our kids are getting into physical media and going back to long content. And this is where I'm interested. And it's both in music and in film, and how we actually take all of this forward. We can throw in next week about sport, as and old school and professional sport versus non-professional. I'm just trying to do the deconstruction and get this going, because things have really changed. And I'm sitting in my late 50s, you're sitting in your 60s healthily. Keith's done his bit, many trips to this country, and we have such a wealth of knowledge here.
Yeah, there's always talent, and there's always a wealth of it. It's how it gets developed and the opportunities that it gets given. And in a country like South Africa, it's quite difficult because we've got a new democracy, a new cultural identity that is developing post '94. We have enormous political fragmentation, cultural fragmentation, and my daughter's studying music, and I ask her, so who's your audience? Who's going to listen to you? And unless she is able to tap the South African market per se, she doesn't have a chance. Because if you can tap the South African market, by extension, you should be able to reach an international market in one way or another. So I find it, we're a fledgling culture, and we're still learning how to we're still learning about our cultural voice in this country and how to express that cultural voice. It's raw and it's energetic and it's got lots of promise. But it's still got a long way to go. It's not like Hollywood or the English or the Europeans who've had film culture and entertainment culture for years and years, or for centuries.
Yeah, I just wanted Keith to respond to that, because I always find, and then I'm going to let Keith respond. I just find that the most objective moments I've had have been out of South Africa, and Keith, I'm going to let you respond to that, because that's quite an important what we want to hear. So I'm going to mute us.
Well, I think that it's important and necessary to say, first of all, that the cultural framework is very new and is still being socialized and still being learned in South Africa, as Garth correctly says. But the culture of the people in South Africa is a very deep and that's a deep seam of knowledge and understanding which has been passed down through generations informally. The 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 difficulties now in part stem from trying to fit that into some sort of institutional framework that can work for everybody. And there's a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of very difficult discussions that are ongoing around those topics. And I've always encountered them literally every time I've been in South Africa. I've worked with a lot of South African artists on film projects when I was documenting their work, who had radically different approaches to connecting with the international market. And for example, I would say, like in my documentary film Punk in Africa, there's a large section of the film that deals with the fact that because that music was so politicized in the 1980s, it had no chance to be released domestically within.
We wait for Keith. I mean, it's always we always wait, but it's always just so worthwhile. I think he's back. He's just turning. Always wait for Keith. He'll be back. Please, God, he'll be back. Just difficulty that's just hanging there. God, I mean, it's just just while we wait. I mean, it's quite amazing, just like how, this deconstruction of South Africa, because I realized that as much as Jamaica created like reggae, and I've got a whole books on it. I've already got books on South African jazz from the 80s with a chapter, and now it's explosive. But we don't have archival, capacity. It's been destroyed. It's not being brought together. It's all fragmented all over the place. And there's such an amazing history from exile to what happened inside the country.
And it's always that imperative.
It's back.
That imperative of preserving a culture as well as being relevant in today and the future, particularly if you want to make a living out of it.
Anyway, let's get back to Keith, because he was Keith, yeah.
The example of Shifty notwithstanding, and the Shifty project was very underground anyway. But at that time, and the musicians I was working with on that project were engaged in this international scene of cassette trading and sending their music on cassette tapes all over the world, where it got special recognition because it was from South Africa. That gave it more potency, more relevance, even in other countries. But it had to be done through completely clandestine and informal distribution networks. Then, in a more recent version of kind of the same approach, about 10 years ago, I worked extensively with DJ Spoko from Attridgeville. And I was really the only person to go in and document his creative process and he basically lived in a shack in an informal settlement in Attridgeville by choice. He actually was from a more middle class background, but he chose to be there because the lifestyle that he wanted to be engaged in was to make music 24 hours a day and to stay up all night making music with his friends in a neighborhood where nobody was going to care that he was doing that, which he couldn't do if he stayed at his parents' place. So that whole crew of guys were doing this unbelievable and to me completely avant-garde music, but which was also very rooted in ancestral or tribal knowledge. The beat structures they were working with, they were applying it to electronic music, but it was actually a lot of it was deeply based in traditional Tswana music. And so it was something that it was in an unfashionable language. It was from being made in an informal settlement. Everything about it had a certain negativity around it for the official South African music industry at that time. And so these guys basically didn't care. They weren't interested in working with Gallo Records or with established sort of house music culture in Johannesburg or even in Pretoria. They weren't interested in it. So they were basically doing completely DIY distribution around Pretoria, just basically giving their music away to taxi guys just to get it out in the streets and be heard everywhere. But their real emphasis was on SoundCloud and getting the music known abroad, because they knew that it's better for them to compete in the arena of how electronic music was being made and distributed and consumed in Berlin or in the UK or in Barcelona or in Brooklyn, New York. And to hell with Johannesburg. It was their attitude. Like, that was of no relevance to them, because they just felt that it was an inferior way of doing things, that it was slowing them down to actually try to distribute CDs within South Africa or work in that model. They were done with it. So a lot of the work I've done in South Africa has been, I'm really inspired by these artists and how they find ways to get out. They find creative ways to supersede all the challenges that are placed in their way, all the obstacles that are put in front of them by the so-called music industry in South Africa. That's actually, for many of these artists, is just seen as another form of limitation. Although you can get a lot of money very quickly up front, but a lot of artists have realized that having control over your intellectual property rights is much more important in the long term. Again, this is an old story in South Africa about musicians being ripped off by corporate interests and having their music monetized by people other than themselves, and especially in foreign contexts, and having their music repackaged, redistributed abroad with no say for them. Then the third aspect that I'll bring up is that I had the great fortune and great privilege and great honor of meeting.
We've got Keith teamed out. 40s, I'm just going through it because you've got to watch what's going on. So this goes my uni commission seminars for PhD students on how to write their thesis without jeopardizing the best gig I ever had.
Where's the Earl? Is he still in there?
No, Earl's just from the comments. Some slight overlap in the end with your, just these are the comments. Keith is back. Let's just add him to stage. And let's roll. Okay, Keith, back at you.
Yes, sorry for all these interruptions, Stefan. I apologize for all these interruptions, Stefan. It's our version of load shedding here, because everybody in my building has full broadband, total internet all the time, and everyone's running 3 or 4 different devices at full capacity in every flat in this building all the time, because people are streaming stuff on their phones. And the internet works perfectly fine, but there's these little flickers, and it affects this type of streaming. That's what's happening. Damn it. So it's beyond my control. Thank you for being patient. What I was going to say to wrap that up, I also had the chance to work with General MD Sharinda, who was someone who had attempted to control his musical empire, which was basically something he was doing within the confines of Bantu Radio. So it was subsidized, but also controlled by the former government. But he was able to make enough money to support his very large extended family. I met 5 of his wives out of the total of 7. I don't know how many children he had, but he had bought essentially a farm for all of his sons, and he had 40 plus grandchildren living. It was like
was he competing with Fela?
Yeah, like Fela. It was like going to be in the shrine with Fela Kuti, and Sharinda had that kind of depth and power. He was also a traditional healer. He was a really magnificent figure. He's also the first person to record an LP in South Africa using a synthesizer. So he was also a really pioneering figure in electronic music as well. But he was someone who had just been pirated and stolen from his entire career, and he had no recourse of how to deal with it, because he was just in a marginal place. And the most obvious example is, of course, that there's a song that he wrote in Tsonga language on the Graceland album by Paul Simon, which sold, I don't know how many tens of millions of copies. And the publishing of that is credited to Simon Music. But Paul Simon doesn't speak that language, just like he doesn't speak isiZulu, although he controlled 90% of Joseph Shabalala's music publishing also. That's just outright theft. And that's yet another historic problem that South African artists have faced. Sharinda also had dealings with Malcolm McLaren, stealing from him, and Chico. It wasn't just international.
And because Jack, who Garth's brother and myself worked with, and we were the only white people at his funeral in Soweto. You know,
No,
there's nobody else. Everybody, Brad and myself were at that funeral. It's just, you know, this is exactly where it's at.
yeah. So anyway, my point overall was that a lot of my work in South Africa has somehow tapped into exactly these themes that Garth was bringing up about these challenges that are faced by trying to forge what is a national collective culture in South Africa when there are enormous obstacles even to having the necessary and correct conversations, let alone how the distribution model is going to work in an extremely challenging time for artists anyway. It's even more challenging in South Africa. But a lot of these people I worked with have shown that every challenge is also, it can be a hidden asset. It can be something you can turn to your advantage if you approach it properly. If you approach it in a creative and all-encompassing way that you're going to get your message out no matter what, and anything that's put in your obstacle then becomes something that you use to your own advantage. And that's something I find incredibly inspiring in South Africa, to be honest, because I haven't found it to such a deep extent across all parts of the society and in many other countries. Part of it is also to do with the enormous and deep multiculturalism within South Africa, which creates these feuds and jockeying for position within a small media landscape between different languages. But there's a lot of fertile elements that come out in that mix as well.
Intersections, cultural intersections where the real kind of creativity and innovation lies. When you separate, they can be quite bland, actually, you know, compared to if you kind of fuse them together or mix them. Yeah.
No, I agree. It's one of the things that has drawn me to go back there again and again and again is that the raw creativity and the energy of the country is sort of unsurpassed, and it's intoxicating and hugely inspiring to be there and to find these intersections and try to navigate them. And it's, for some reason, and maybe it's easier for me as a foreigner going there, but I've always been able to hone in on things which are incredibly interesting to me, find these people, and saying it in the most humble possible way, they're usually very happy to share their stories, share their processes, and to be documented because they feel flattered that somebody cares about it. And there may be a certain advantage to being a foreigner in these interactions, but I have always tried to give as much back to South Africa as I take from it. Hence the lectures at AFTA, Stefan. That's a perfect example of that. When Gary and I did that, that was just we considered that like community service, that we wanted to participate in some form of skills transfer with young South Africans and young Africans at the school, rather than just go fly in and do our own work and leave. We want to communicate to people in that environment, and I always loved doing it.
No, I suppose, when we go to Europe, we also find that fascination because it's new and it's novel. It's something we haven't seen before. It's a perspective and view that, is different. And I suppose that's what travel does to you. It allows you to kind of intersect with other cultures in a very, very novel way. Yeah, earlier you come back, you said that you've been to another film school. You mentioned another film school. I think it was the one in Rome, the Experimentale in Rome.
I didn't study there, and I also didn't study in the Danish film school, but I had some experience of them because when I was around FAMU, we were always interacting with people from those schools, and they were sort of fellow travelers in a way. They were other European schools that had a deep history and were considered sort of more artistic in their leanings and in their lineage. So yeah, I've met people from there, and I'm aware of their teaching methodology, but I never studied there personally.
I've been there. Katerina, she used to be the dean of that school. And I think they've got a branch of it in Milano as well. Bartholomew runs that. And they have a very laissez-faire approach as well to people making film. And they're not called the Rome Experimental Film School for nothing. You know, their focus is on experimentation. I wonder what you thought about that. And I know that FAMU is also big on experimentation, or a kind of creative focus on the artist. I just wonder, Italy, was such a formidable kind of filmmaking country that gave us so many wonderful filmmakers and films. Do you guys in Europe still see Italian films that you go, wow, these Italians are really on it and making it happen?
Well, I mean, it's funny that you asked me this, because I'm actually doing an interview for a publication in Italy, in Bolzano right now, for Cultura Elemente magazine has asked me to do a sort of interview over email comparing the relative successes of European co-production models in cinema in different countries. And I told them that, like Italian cinema is not at its peak period right now. It's not in what I would consider one of its more dynamic eras. The filmmakers in Italy, the films I've seen in recent years that I've liked most have been made by much older filmmakers. Like Marco Bellocchio still makes films and they're still great, but he's a guy who's 80 years old. He's still magnificent, but this is not an emerging generation of talents in Italy. As I find that, for me, the most interesting and most experimental and most vibrant, but also like films that are imperfect and that capture my attention because they feel vibrant and contemporary. A lot of them come from Poland. I think the Polish cinema at the moment is extremely good. I think there's been amazing stuff coming out of Ukraine in the last 5 to 10 years, and for example, the film Donbass, which is a feature film, which is almost entirely improvised by the actors themselves, shot on iPhones, but it works really well. And that is a film that, for as cheaply as it was made, it has this urgency and this passion of a film that's being made in a war zone. Like other films that take years to complete, it's not going to have that. And I was really impressed and really inspired by that. Not just the film itself, the film is above average, but I was really taken by the fact that it existed at all, that it got made in this way, and that it was reflecting things as they were happening, which is what cinema used to do. And it's so expensive now, and it's so involved in a co-production model between countries, at least in European cinema, that it's difficult to capture that magic, to capture the lightning in a bottle aspect that all the new wave cinema used to have. And I don't know if we can ever get back to that in Europe, but I don't know, like films from somehow the Polish model works really well now, and Danish films are mostly really good, and the French still make good films, but they're a minority in a lot of bland stuff that gets made too. It's kind of the same.
The Belgians make good films.
What's that?
The Belgians, they make some good films as well.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, I'm not limiting it just to these few examples. I'm just in response to your question. I'm not sure this is the best era for European cinema in general. I think that European cinema was very. I think we're still going through a moment where filmmakers are figuring out how to use streaming services and the funding that offers to best effect. And I think a lot of energy in the German film industry, which is by far the biggest one in Europe, too much energy went into making television series, to making long formats, 20-part television shows for Netflix or similar distribution models with extremely high production values, sometimes making those films in English as well as in German. But it's not really cinema. It's for some other distribution model. It's a form of television.
Yeah.
It's a 20th century form of television. And that sort of cannibalized so much of the money and the energy in Germany that it's had a knock-on effect in the smaller countries and in the smaller markets.
Yeah, it's like fashion, fast content. You know, you've got to churn. It's churning, putting as many titles as you can out there, hoping to hit the target.
And I think that's the largest problem that European filmmakers struggle with. That it's not that there's any lack of talent or of good ideas. It's how to make those work in this model that we have at the moment, which is maybe not the best place for some of the most pronounced and specifically European aspects of filmmaking to thrive. But I don't know, like there are arguments for and against the co-production model as well, because that tends to dilute a certain national specificity in cinema, because you're always working between 2 or 3 different countries to get the film made. So am I, for that matter. Like my films are all co-productions as well, but I think all those things are a matter of how you use them, how you approach them, and how much you use them versus how much they use you.
You know what I find the most interesting is, you know, you have the emergence of, you know, this rising Asian population. You have this rising African population. You have this rising Latin population. And you know, these are all potential audiences, and they dwarf, you know, the European numbers. And the Americans are the only ones who kind of get close in terms of, you know, their population demographies. I went to Australia to Griffith Film School, and they had a massive festival there for the Pacific Rim. You know, films from Malaysia and from all the countries on the Pacific Rim. I must say, I've never ever seen an event like that in my life, and the number of films and the diversity of films that came out of that. And I almost felt like, you know, I was at the edge of the future. This is where everything's going. It's moving away from, you know, the kind of traditions we've understood and what we've enjoyed out of the Age of Enlightenment, and to, you know, the imperial and colonial eras and things like that. Those those markets are so massive, and the kind of money that they have to make films is also incredible. I'm not including. I'm mainly speaking about the Pacific Rim countries.
Well, I just want to add to that, because I mean, you know, and I was very blessed in my other work, you know, having worked with NGOs and doing series and stuff in Asia, you know, and having co-produced a film that came out in Nepal. But Busan is such a powerful film festival right now. And even in sport right now, how Australia has aligned itself towards sporting tournaments, you know, within Asia, because really it's part of that world. It's a very powerful, interesting place and space. I don't know where it's going to go, but all I know is that I just saw some weird, amazing stuff happening in Asia, you know, through music, you know, Japan having lost the war and all of that, and psych and all that. But looking now, you look at Japanese cinema, so like from Kurosawa through to contemporary Korean cinema. It's like just this maze of this other world that colonialism and us white and Western born people or whatever were just not engaging with, or our parents did not teach us to engage with that part of the world. At least,
no, if you're
talking for myself.
If you look at, you know, been to Beijing, a film school, and and they talk about, oh, we make 700 feature films a year. And you're going, oh my goodness, 700. I don't, that's a lot of feature films to make in a year. Never mind all the television they make. And then India was, I think, probably the most interesting model that I've ever seen. You go to Mumbai. I don't know if you've been to Mumbai Film City, and they build the studios out of roof branding and black plastic bags. Okay, and they create massive studios. And outside the studios, all you see are this row of like 50cc and 100cc motorbikes.
Yeah.
Massive generator that's like kind of plugged into this plastic tent that they've created. And toilets and things like that. And when you go into the tent, though, it's just there's another world they've created in the tent, and it's just mind blowing what they're doing. And then right next to the tent, there's some guys with a C-stand that they're balancing with a rock, and they've come back from the tent where they fetched the actress and brought her on the back of the 50cc motorcycle to the next set, and she jumps off, and they quickly do a costume change, says a couple of lines, they pop her back on the bike, she goes back to the big plastic studio. And there are formal studios there, but they're in between, in this kind of forest or park. They've got all these big, these massive studios that are created out of brand.
But what I want to get to, because I mean, we can is, and Keith, I also want to ask you is, where do you see where Asian culture or African culture, like you've engaged yourself so much in African culture, and speaking earlier about film and music, where is it going now in terms of globalization or non-globalization, or in terms of whether it's physical product, film distribution, whatever? Where do you see your body of work, which has been and there's been a lot in South Africa, and you spoke about certain things in South Africa right now. Where are we going in terms of all of this? Or are we just walking in circles around a group of kids that are on TikTok?
You mean the entire global culture and the industry that surrounds it? That's a very broad. I don't know.
I know it's.
But I just worry about myself and finding a space to do my own creative work and to do stuff that I think is important. And I stay on top of various new technologies as they emerge. I'm not threatened by it. I don't complain about it, and I find it all exciting. It's just a new form of doing DIY culture, which I've always done and which I probably always will do. And if there are dwindling returns for that, I'll still keep doing it as long as I feel that there's some relevance to what I'm doing. The things I'm doing that I'm engaged with are not part of the global mainstream anyway, so I'm not touched too much by the problems and the shifts and the global dimension to all these emerging trends. And I don't really need to worry about social media or TikTok because it doesn't have any direct relevance to what I'm doing. At the same time, I have absolutely no problem with it as a medium for other people to express themselves in, and it's all interesting as it keeps developing, as it keeps changing into new directions, new forms, new media. Basically, that's interesting, that's exciting, but it's not necessarily what I do. So I don't know if I'm best placed to comment on where we're all going, where everything is heading. But I feel fairly optimistic and fairly confident that interesting and new and creative things will always get made. They will always find some kind of audience. They will find some place where they can exist and be welcomed and be consumed by an audience that likes and appreciates them. I like the fact that the group of people making these things is more and more global, more and more diverse, more and more gender balanced. all of that is enormously positive. And I think that independent cinema, independent music, independent culture will always have a place wherever there's a need for it to have a place.
Absolutely. And we've been going a little bit, and we could just go on and on and on. And this has actually been quite a broad conversation that could go very, very deep. And I actually want to sort of start winding things down now. I just think it's because there's so much that we've covered. So I'm just going to ask, Keith, you're cool with that, and then we'll just stick around for a couple of minutes. We're going to end the stream pretty soon.
Sure. I hope I answered your question.
Always, Keith. Tonight was just like we're just gonna hang out, whatever. But you've always just got so much contribution, and it just gets deeper. And I'm watching certain comments, and I've got to start actually threading out a couple of these streams in a little bit more of a focus, because I want to be like Mr. Westman, who was there earlier, where he keeps his streams sort of strictly to an hour, maybe an extra few minutes, and then cut it. And this has been absolutely brilliant. It's always just so great to get you up there. And I know you've been very, very busy at the moment, and we're very grateful. And for Garth, hosting me and all of that. But I'm going to, and then Keith, just stick around afterwards as we shut down the stream. But Keith, have you got a record to show? What did you play this week?
Oh, well, I'll be right back then. I'll show you what I was listening to today while I was getting ready for this. I was listening to Jimmy Rushing records.
Jimmy Rushing.
Okay, I'll go through these really quickly for you, Stefan. I don't know why I was in the mood to listen to Jimmy Rushing, and I have a bunch of Jimmy Rushing records because I always love that particular sound of like old Kansas City hard swing from the 1940s, like that Count Basie, Big Joe Turner, Jimmy Rushing sort of sound. I like the. It's a very masculine sound, but it's also very sensuous. So it's a type of jazz that I really relate to. So I was listening to this wonderful Jimmy Rushing, listen to the blues, which is what is this? It's on Vanguard. That's an old Vanguard record. Wonderful stuff. And then this is a more mainstream recording from Columbia Records, Rushing Lullabies, which is probably the more commercial of Jimmy Rushing stuff. And it just is a wonderful image as well on the cover. But there's some on this record, Jimmy Rushing is also starting to do what we would now call like a rock and roll repertoire, which was the hard R&B of the 1950s when this was recorded. So there are songs like "Good Rockin' Tonight" by Ray Brown and "3 Long Years," which Bobby Bland did. But those are almost like early rock and roll songs. And then Stefan, since you asked me, this was yesterday's stuff. Yesterday I was more on a non-English tip. So do you know this guy?
Tete Montula. No. That just I'd have to make you big. Hold on. Just wait. How do I do that? Oh lordy. No. I'm just going to three dots. What? You see, I'm not solo layout. I'm just going to go Keith alone. Yeah. That's it. Catalonian songs. No, that solo piano. Keith, that looks absolutely amazing.
I don't know. Are you still hearing me? My image seems to have frozen.
Yes. Yeah. We're hearing you.
Frozen. Okay. Yeah, it's basically those are solo piano, grand piano renditions, jazz improvisations on Catalan folk material. Tete Montulio is an amazing European jazz artist of the 1970s who nobody knows because he was completely blind and partly handicapped. So because of some injury he suffered when he was a child, and so he was unable to travel. He couldn't really go to the United States. He couldn't travel to jazz festivals. So he just stayed in Spain, which was just emerging out of fascism at the time. So this guy is completely lost as a major figure in European jazz. And then the last thing I'll show you, this is another magnificent, amazing record. Larry Harlow, El Rubio Marviano, doing Arsenio Rodriguez tunes. And so this is like old school Afro-Cuban son montuno music from the 1950s, done by Arsenio Rodriguez originally, that have been sort of arranged. Larry Harlow. Sorry, yep.
Orchestra Hello. Is it a Latin American pressing?
No, it's Fania. It's Fania Records in New York.
Yeah.
It's basically
wonderful.
Larry Harlow, who he was not a Latino himself. He was always famously called El Judío Maravilloso, the marvelous Jew. He was actually from Long Island, but he plays piano on almost every Fania hard salsa duro recording from the 1970s. He's a legend in New York salsa, New York Latin music. On that particular record, he's doing old Arsenio Rodriguez songs as kind of salsa arrangements with a big band, and it's killer. It's a really, anyone who doesn't know this record, this is one of your. Larry Harlow also did boogaloo records and psychedelic soul kind of Latin records, but for like the real deep cultural salsa stuff, like real Puerto Rican, New Yorican music, this is a key record. This is really good stuff. So
I've got a couple of Fania releases. It's actually interesting. I was gonna just also pull out two records that just off Garth's pile, and next time we'll go into. You want to hold that? This is not me. This is just me pulling off what Garth was obviously playing most recently on top of his pile. So obviously there's a copy. Or let's just go into solo layout here. So we can actually, I'm managing the stuff. Oh no, that's you. Sorry, we've got to get me. Exit solo layout, and now we're going to go here. This one. Yeah. See where we go solo layout. Yeah, then I can. So obviously the fantastic Indestructible beat of Soweto. We all know that. Keith and I have discussed this. I mean, this is fantastic.
And it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, the Muay Thai Queens. I mean, we just know that Rhythm of Resistance. I'm sorry, this is not. This is not Indestructible beat of Soweto. I got it wrong. Cover. This is the Rhythm of Resistance.
Amazing.
Yeah. So on here we've got from Babsi Malangeni, Malombo, Maranya and the Cannibals, Ladies with Black Mambazo. We've got Johnny and Sipa before they were even Juluka. We've got Mortella Queen's original Abafana Basektu Deni. And then I mean, this is an album. Yeah, I've got a copy of this as well. This was released 1978 UK on Virgin. The record's on the turntable, so it's not here. That's just one. And then we might just want to also talk about this one. And then obviously, so I'm going to throw it back to Keith, just so we get all of us on screen. Just hang on a second. Exit solo layout. So yeah, Keith, that was what was on Garth's little pile there, which is kind of interesting.
I was actually listening to the response to the annual budget for the last 2 days. It's a very important budget that was released for 2024-25, which is not on any hit parade or making it on Spotify at this rate.
Anyway, Keith, getting back to that. So yeah, but Keith, did you ever hear that David Kramer track that Red Wine that Roger and Lucy recorded? You know the story.
Yes, I mean I don't know David Kramer personally, but I knew Talib Peterson through my former business partner.
They were together.
Yeah, of course. So I heard a lot of stories from the source, and basically I knew Talib through my former business partner Dion Maas, who worked with those guys extensively. But I mean, it's really interesting David Kramer was apparently one of the most censored artists in South Africa in the 1970s and 1980s. He is somehow left out of these conversations about what is struggle music and resistance culture. But David Kramer was always under heavy manners from the government, and the Roger Lucy connection is something that is it brings that more into focus. I think there is a certain actual political and social depth behind David Kramer and his musicals that maybe is not apparent at first sight, but I think it's really important. It's a really good thing to know about.
No, absolutely. You know, and I think we're gonna. It's just brilliant because I mean, you and I have had our little discussions. I'm gonna ask you to stay on, and you know, I'm gonna shut the stream and thank everybody for being there. But Garth and I are just gonna have a little closeout, you know, just with you. But I mean, it's just so rich as we keep moving, you know, through where we're going. I've got another whole thing, and I don't want to get myself too deep into how I see Kramer because you know he came out of a sort of Jewish Afrikaans kind of family, and you know, as you said, there's certain people that have just been silenced, you know, or the stories are not being told, and I think we really need to keep it going. So, Keith, you just hang in there. I just want to thank everybody who's watched it. We're going to keep it up. I'm going to end the stream. Keith, you're going to just stay on the back end, and I just want to have like 3 minutes or 2 minutes and just say thank you to everybody.
Yes,
4D,
all the comments.
And especially to Garth and Keith tonight, just to get something different going. We're going to stay, but I just want to thank everybody. Nick, all of you, Concert Buddy, Chance, lovely, and we'll catch you. I'm going to end the stream, but Keith, you just hang in there in the back end, please. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Ciao.